What's up, everyone? Linda Key here, coming at you from Alexander Street Studios on Treaty 7 territory with the Blackfoot Confederacy and Métis Region 3, where I feel honored to live, work, play, create, and learn. Today's special guest is Elisa Shigehiro, here to speak with us a little bit on getting inked.
Lately I've been trying to find my way to a place where life is more than empty space. Wondering where I belong, just don't fit in, 'cause I choose not to play along, no.
This episode, we have Elisa Shigehiro. I've invited Elisa to talk about and share with us on getting inked, the art of tattooing. So welcome, Elisa.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming to the show. My first question for you is, how did you get started in learning how to tattoo?
Oh boy, I'm pretty old. This is gonna take a minute. I've wanted to be a tattooer since I was a little kid.
Okay.
I've always liked art. I've always liked drawing, and art's a risky business to get into, or that was my perception of it at the time. And my parents are culturally Japanese. So my dad was born in Canada, but his parents only spoke Japanese. He served as an interpreter for them. Tattoo it's getting more mainstream for sure, but it is still very frowned upon in Japan. So it's just a career I didn't think I could have for a really long time. And a couple of years ago, I got into painting and illustration pretty late in life, I think like in my 30s. And so I've been working as a painter and illustrator and also doing odd jobs to keep my head above water while I've been doing that. So retail and like just odd jobs that people would hire me to do. And a couple of years ago, I was really reviewing my life and went, I really want to be a tattooer. I've been wanted to be one for a really long time. And I finally went, life is short and it's time to pursue it.
A couple of years ago. Do you mind? So I need to ask, what were you doing before that you made that decision?
I was working, I was working a retail day job at a consignment store. I had my first gallery show in 2019. So as a painter, I'd won a grant and then had a show, which most of the grant money went to supplies. So it's not as fancy as it sounds. And I was also doing like custom inscription work for a 3D print company. So I was doing art in a few different capacities and barely managing to pay my bills. So I decided to start pursuing an apprenticeship around 2019, 2020. And then the pandemic started. So really good timing. I apprenticed for a couple of months at one shop in Calgary that unfortunately ended up closing because of the pandemic. Spent the shutdown drawing and practicing. And then was fortunate enough to get a new apprenticeship in October 2020. So
Cool. Okay, so I want to go back to something you said about tattooing being frowned upon in Japanese culture because, and I might have already asked you this before, my lens was like about tattooing and especially tattoo designs is that you see a lot of different Asian symbols. Like, I was surprised to hear you say that it was frowned upon because I made an assumption that because we as North Americans having these types of like semiotics on our body, that I just assumed that it was like that in say Japan.
So for a period of time, like a couple of hundred years ago in Japan, tattooing is actually used to mark criminals. So you would have the government would put, if you were had committed a crime, the government would have different symbols that they'd apply to your body to indicate what your crime was. So you come out of jail and it's kind of hard to get a job because everyone could see that you were a felon or like could see what you had done. And so people would come out of prison and they would go see a tattoo artist to cover whatever mark they'd received in prison. So, but having that tattoo covering you also indicated that, hey, you had been in jail. So it did a couple of things. The artists that were covering the prison tattoos were using an art form called ukiyo, which I might be pronouncing wrong, but there were old Japanese woodcuts that they were referencing. So the really stylized nature of Japanese tattoo comes from that. And doing it was illegal. Like covering those symbols was illegal because the government had put them on you for a reason. That practice is a reason why tattooing's had like this long history of being like a criminal activity in Japan. It's also very painful to get a traditional hand hammered tattoo. So if you got one, the people start to get like these large bodysuits, and it was a sign of how freaking tough you are, that you can sit through that amount of pain. But if you look at the way that they're designed, they generally end below the collarbone, they end at the wrist, at the ankle, or just above the ankle at the knee. So you can cover it with long sleeve shirts, collared shirts, and pants. There's still like bathhouses, public swimming areas, places in Japan where you can't go if you have tattoos. And the culture is changing a little bit because so many Westerners have them. But if you are a citizen of Japan, there are certain jobs that won't have you if you have tattoos.
There's a negative connotation, of course, when it comes to saying, okay, well, I was a criminal, or at least I was put in jail and I got these tattoos. But then as time goes on, it becomes this, it's cool to have a tattoo, right?
It is cool to have a tattoo. I think it's always been cool to have a tattoo. I think that like the big shift that happened that changed it from like just reprobates and like derelicts from getting tattoos would have been probably around the 80s or 90s. So there were there was a wave of new artists who were coming in, like guys like Guy Aitchison, who were had like more of an art background. So tattooing for quite a long time was more of a trade than I guess it straddled the line between art and trade. You would have artists or tattooers who would basically buy pre-made designs, like flash sheets of pre-made designs, and then their trade was just to apply them to the skin. They weren't necessarily producing new art. But over the last 30 years or so, people have been coming in just like with new techniques, different colors, new machines, and a different mindset in terms of how tattoos are applied.
I guess I'm just thinking about more like the lineage, but also the transformation of how and how when it comes to the history of it from different cultures, you know, how does it manifest here in the Western world, you know? I was able to go back home to the Philippines, and I did this tour, and in the city, and the tour guide showed us these statues of these kings, and he started speaking about these, you know, each tattoo or ring on the arm of like a warrior king symbolized a battle that they had fought. And so I thought, wow, that's so honorable. And I realized as North Americans, my feeling was, well, we have the freedom to just tattoo ourselves without having to win a battle.
That's true.
So I started to feel a sense of, it reminded me of this kind of North American, you know, we have a lot of freedoms and we can express ourselves in a different way. But how are we, a big part of this show is like, how do we honor those things? And I do have to say one thing. I want to ask you something.
Sure.
Because I notice, and I'm not trying to like throw shade at anyone, I just want to ask your opinion, because I've, you know, met some friends or dated guys that have gone to like they're like Euro-Canadian men that go to Asia, and they get, you know, I'm thinking of someone in particular, and like got the whole, you know, I don't know, what do you call it, like that style that you said, like not just different symbols, but it was this connected,
Get a sleeve,
you know, geisha with a fan and a sword, and then like a lot of Japanese and Asian symbols with like lotus flowers and all that. And I think, what is their connection to that? or do they not have one? And am I being really judgmental about it?
Let me know if I understood you correctly. When in your travels, like the style of tribal tattooing that was being explained, I'm not sure if it was tribal, but the style of tattooing that was being explained has a very specific language attached to it and specific meaning attached to it. And you're wondering, is North American tattooing kind of disconnected from that here? So from my perspective of what I've seen, North American tattooing has developed its own language. A vast majority of the tattoos I do actually have deep meaning for the clients who are coming in to see them. We sit down, we have a consult, and we talk over their designs, what elements they want to include, and quite often why. So most of the time, when I'm helping someone design a tattoo, like I recently did one that's like it's a heron with some anemone flowers. And the client who came in, this is a very personal memorial piece for her. And the representative of her family and her father, the flowers that we chose reference flowers that were used at her father's funeral. So you can see it and be like, oh, this is a pretty piece of art. And then for her, it has like really deep significance. And often when you see people who have like sleeves, sometimes they're like, yeah, I want like a lion and a crown because I think it's cool. And sometimes it's like it represents specific family members, specific events, particular things. So I think in North America, what we have is an enormous amount of freedom to get to choose. I want to get like this bouquet that represents all these members of my family. And then I want like a piece of thread that's winding around it and then like a needle, like a sewing needle kind of tying it off because it represents my grandmother. Or, hey, I was looking through like your pre-made designs and I saw that you drew a picture of a pear that was like having a nap and its butthole is apparent, and I would like that tattoo because it's funny. Like there's the types of tattoos I do run that gamut from either this is hilarious, I want a camel tattooed on my big toe, and I want to get that with all of my friends. In which case, I'm like, get in here, let's make this happen.
The same gang crew,
exactly. Or like, I want to sit and talk with my artist for half an hour about like the meaning of all of these different things that I want to incorporate. And I think the thing with being a tattooer in North America and being a tattooer in Canada specifically is we are such an individualistic country, and we have such individualistic ideals that a lot of those rules are kind of out the window. People can really choose whatever they want. There's there's an immense beauty to that. Like there's an immense freedom to it.
Yeah, there is. And I think maybe that's why. Okay, I'm going to be totally honest. I feel like when it came to this person who had the geisha and the lotus flower and all this, that's part of this kind of reconciliation I think that we're going through in terms of like what privileges we have and how we're trying to create more balance and even out the power dynamics in our society. Is when I think about that, man, I feel like, especially as an Asian woman, that it's this act of, I don't know, like exoticism. Is it wrong of me to make that, like, I'm sad to say the word like assumption that this person's kind of just consuming it and extracting from it. And that's sometimes where I feel like having this conversation can help us to all feel safer in this world and be more mindful of like treating people and like acknowledging people in the way that it's more honoring. And so I don't know if it's just me being, I mean, that's my true question. And sometimes I'll admit it bugs me. Yeah. So I just wondered what your perspective was on stuff like that.
So I want to be sure I understand you right. Sure. And I've experienced my share of fetishization for sure, 100%. My background happens to be Japanese Canadian, and we're amongst Asian Canadians, we're actually pretty rare. There's not a lot of us. So sometimes people are weirdly excited to find out that's what my background is.
Okay.
And
Can you expand
I've
on
got
why?
I think because Japan in particular, there's a lot of people who are big fans of manga. There are a lot of people who are big fans of anime. I hilariously don't consume a lot of that. A lot of my friends actually know a lot more about it than I do.
You should go to Oda Fest. It's happening.
Oh man, I was gonna exhibit at Oda Fest.
Oh, okay,
like the
okay.
year before the pandemic. I applied, I got accepted, and I was like, yeah, and then they were like, we're not doing it this year.
Sorry.
Because everything is shut down. That is okay. I'll come as a guest. That sounds way more relaxing. So in terms of tattooing, if you see a white guy with Japanese traditional tattoos, let's just we'll lay it out very explicitly. It does really depend. I think on a case by case basis.
Of course.
So sometimes if the person has gone to take the time to get a really nice Japanese traditional piece done, I'm always excited to see it. A piece like that takes it's very painful. It takes a lot of dedication and time to sit through. If you see a dude out there with chicken soup written on them in Chinese because they Googled the symbols and got that done. I mean, I think that was a lot more prevalent in the 90s. And yeah, I've had this conversation before too about when you're getting, when you have people who aren't Japanese or who aren't from the culture doing Japanese tattoos, is it appropriation? And at this point, and this is just my opinion, I don't think so, because I've seen there are some really incredible Japanese traditional being done by white Americans and white Canadians. That's top notch. It's gorgeous. And I think one reason why is because they're taking the time to respect the language. They're taking the time to respect the designs and respect the language. There's some absolute Japanese traditional out there as well. It's case by case. It's really hard to speak to it on an individual level. I think the thing to keep in mind is it might be kind of a dating red flag if you run into a dude who has tattoos like that, who seems like a little too interested in you. There might be some fetishization going on there. But yeah, it's it is a thing to consider on an individual basis.
Yeah, and of course that makes sense. It's about inquiring, right? And you segued already into the last question I was going to ask is how do you feel that we can move forward in a less hurtful manner? And I believe the same thing. It's like having a conversation, just as I should have a conversation with that person instead of making assumptions about them, and learning about what is their connection with it, and like you said, how they honor it. Do you have you found yourself having conversations like that with guests, with clients when they come in, for example, and they say, well, I want this, say it's something written in Japanese characters, for example, and they're not Japanese. Do you ever ask oh, cool, where did you get this from, and what does it mean?
I have had clients come to me for Chinese, Japanese, Korean writing. Despite my background, I can't read. So I sometimes they come to me and they're like, is this right? I'm like, you're going to have to tell me.
Totally.
As if I'm doing any kind of English language script or script of any kind, I actually get the client to sign off on the stencil because I'm not going to be responsible for any spelling mistakes. So if there's grammar or if there's any kind of errors in the tattoo, if it's those symbols, it's on them. It is pretty rare. I'm not seeing it as often as as we saw it in the 90s or 2000s. And I do think one reason why is because this conversation is already happening, right. Both in the tattoo community and amongst people in general. It's a little bit cringy to get an Asian symbol tattoo if you don't know how to read it, or you don't know for sure what it says, or if you just Googled it.
Yeah.
That's already become pretty passe, which is great. And what I think what we're also finding is because tattooing is getting so much more, because it keeps growing in popularity, is that people are doing more research, and they're doing more of their due diligence to kind of make sure that they're respecting those traditions. I think one thing with Japanese tattoo in particular, like that's specific, is because it's so frowned upon in Japan, it flourishes here. Like it's like America, North America, places around the world that aren't Japan are safe places,
Right.
for Japanese tattooing to really build and flourish. There's the great masters are in Japan, of course, but they're watching their art form get elevated around the world, because it's celebrated here in a way that it isn't in Japan, which is absolutely wild. And yeah, my hope is that as time goes by, that stigma is going to continue to lift, like because tattoo continues to get more of the it continues to get more of the reputation it deserves, like as opposed to the reputation it currently has.
Right.
As an art form, like as a form of self-expression, as a way for people to feel more comfortable in their skin, and then to like show their love and appreciation for art. It's when we're talking about appropriation in North America, I feel like Japanese tattoo is just in a funny spot because its nation of origin frowns upon it. Like it's such an unusual thing.
Yeah, that's what I was surprised when you mentioned that. I feel like I'm learning so much. There is a woman, and I can't recall her name right now. She is one of like the last living ink stick and poke tattoo artists that lives in the Philippines.
I know who you mean.
Do you know her name? I can't remember, and I need to do more of my research, but
She's a straight up baller. Yeah.
and she's in her or maybe she's 103 or something like that. And I especially as a Filipino Canadian, especially these days when there's that intergenerational kind of trauma of being disconnected from roots, and now there's space for us to be exploring that. So I definitely jumped on that train and like it made me more interested in our heritage and what tattooing has meant with our indigenous people in the Philippines. So I'm just scraping the surface of it, but it makes me feel it's a part of my feeling whole, so yeah, I just wanted to share like that journey for myself, and trying to make sure that that I am doing my research, and I'm like honoring the lineage.
It's funny that you mentioned like that it's a way to make you whole. Your viewers can probably see I don't have any tattoos that are visible. They're all on my legs.
Got you.
And it is out of respect to my parents. They are not wild about my career choice, which I did take later in life, but like as a full-grown adult, I had to have a sit down with them to explain to them that I was pursuing an apprenticeship and that I would be getting tattoos. You can be a tattooer without tattoos, but I don't want to do that. I want to like know how it feels and eventually be covered. It's a tough conversation to have, and one reason I don't have any visible right now is because I have plans. I want a complete unified Japanese traditional bodysuit, like at least from the waist up. And I want that to extend onto my shaved head. And I don't want to do it while my parents are alive because I think it will kill them early. So there's a wholeness that I'm waiting for. Wow. I love my parents dearly. I certainly don't want to hasten their demise. It's nothing like that, but that's something that is just going to need to wait, because on a generational level, it's something that they are going to have a very tough time with.
Thanks for sharing that.
Even though
that
it's such a huge
heavy.
part of our history, even though it's like, even though Japanese tattoo has been it was a huge influence on American tattoo, like and a huge influence on tattoo around the world. Like the techniques, the color application is the way that they last is it's unparalleled. Even though we have an enormous history, the way that it's devalued by my own by my own ancestors or my parents, has made it something that I just need to wait for.
That's a very interesting. Like I said earlier, I'm so grateful you shared that. That is a very complex situation to be in, and
It's a
so
bit
I
weird.
appreciate you sharing that story, because it's not. You were speaking about freedom and privilege before, and we do have that living here, but I hear you, and thank you for sharing. That situation is complex, and there's just so many things to weigh in.
Mm-hmm. It's a lot of shades of gray.
Absolutely. And I feel like I was like, okay, let's wrap up now, but I don't want, I thought, wow, you just dropped that story. So thank you for sharing it. And like, you're supported and you're heard. And that generational thing it's always, it's a big thing to navigate, and we are in it. We are all, at least we're having those conversations. I think about my parents and I don't think they had these conversations.
I don't know if they had the space to.
Absolutely.
Yeah, when we talk about privilege, that's I'm 42. My parents are in their late 80s, so like they had us quite late, and that means like my father was born in 1933, my mom I think in 1936. So mom grew up in like war-torn Japan, and my dad was part of the internment. So like there really wasn't space for these kinds of conversations. There was no room for it, and there was a specific way they had to live in order to navigate it. So it's a balance between like respecting what I want, my wishes, how I would like to express myself, and then determining what can I wait for, what can I be patient regarding, how can I be true to myself and also be true, like honor the sacrifices and effort that my parents put into to make it so I could live this life, this immensely privileged life.
Absolutely. It's an ongoing.
So respecting both is, I think, part of that conversation as well, like being immigrant children and also being like a visible minority and all of those other factors that come into being a person of color in this country.
Yeah. Okay, I have one more question. As a woman in this industry, do you mind sharing that, because you've shared so much about from a cultural perspective, but that's another intersection that you're at. How has that been?
It is. Tattooing, historically, it's been a pretty male-dominated industry. One thing that's actually made it easier for women to enter the field, I think, is that the machines have changed. For me, personally, I find the older machines they're heavy, they vibrate, and I already have carpal tunnel from too much illustrating and painting. So the tools that we have are more ergonomic, but there are more women entering the industry, I think, now than ever. And I know that women over the last 20 years or more definitely paved the way for us. They made it a lot easier. And again, I'm very blessed to be coming into it in the last couple of years. There's still abuse that occurs, definitely. There's still there's an immense power dynamic between you and your mentor. And being able to navigate that is a challenge for young women who are coming in. And it's getting better. There's still a lot of room for improvement. And again, I'm very lucky. I came in at age 40 and had like a sense of who I was and what kind of BS I was going to put up with and what I wouldn't. And for young women who are coming in who are in their early 20s or younger, it's it can be some treacherous waters for sure. But that being said, there's more and more positive changes happening, and more female artists coming in, and they're badass female artists, like really, really amazing talent coming in. The majority of clients are female. So like more the demographic that's getting tattoos tends to be young women between 25 to 35. That's the most common age I see for my clients and for most clients. So the fact that women are your primary client base is also going to change the face of the industry and the way that it works.
For sure. And and you're paving the way, A, and B, I imagine that demographic is going to you because you provide that safe space for them. You know, they could be looking for, I want a female artist. I want someone who's BIPOC. I don't know.
That's
I'm not
definitely
sure.
is a thing that my clients bring up to me for sure.
You're needed, That's super cool. That's awesome.
No, it's pretty rad.
Thank you so much for joining. Where can we find you?
Well, thanks for inviting me. Let's see, you can find me on Instagram. I'm at Spinster Tattoo. So it's spinster.tattoo.
Okay.
And you can find me online at just Google Elisa Shigehiro. I've got a website, Facebook, Instagram, slowly working my way towards TikTok. So
Got you. I don't know if I'll ever do TikTok, but
TikTok's weird. Like you need or I shouldn't say weird. TikTok's kind of great because you can't be curated the way that you are expected to be on Instagram. You need to come in with a level of authenticity because Gen Z will sniff you out and be ruthless if you're fake. And I think that's what makes it so scary. I think that's part of what makes it so scary, but exciting too.
But maybe it's a good thing maybe it's a good platform for me. I have no idea. Have to try it on, I guess. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
I'm so grateful. Maybe we can have another episode. Part 2 of this episode.
That would be fun. I'd be down.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing your stories.
Oh, thank you for having me.
All right.
This is an absolute pleasure.
All right,
thanks.
cool. Thank you.